The Ascendancy had conquered 11 species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their warships were massive things of black metal and purple light, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet in half. For 2,000 years, they had spread across the stars like a plague, swallowing civilizations whole and turning proud peoples into slaves. No one had ever stopped them. No one had ever come close. When their scout vessels first detected Earth, the tactical officers barely gave it a second look. The planet was small and blue, covered mostly in water. Its inhabitants had only just begun to reach beyond their atmosphere, sending primitive machines to orbit their single moon. They had no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, no weapons that could threaten a cruiser. By every measure the Ascendancy used to judge a species, humans were nothing special. Admiral or commanded the invasion fleet. He was old by standards, his gray skin stretched tight over the ridges of his skull, his 4 eyes still sharp despite his many centuries of war. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 6 worlds. He knew how this would go. First the ultimatum, then the panic, then the surrender. It was always the same. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Earth on a clear morning in spring. 300 warships hung in orbit like a crown of thorns around the planet, or transmitted the standard message to every frequency the humans used. The words were simple and had been translated into all of their major languages. Surrender. Give up your resources. Accept your place as servants of the Ascendancy. Or die. The humans did not respond for almost 6 hours, or found this curious. Other species usually answered within minutes, either begging for mercy or making futile threats. But the humans were silent. His officers told him not to worry. Perhaps the primitives were simply too shocked to respond. Perhaps their leaders were arguing among themselves about what to do. When the response finally came, it was not what or expected. Instead of words, the humans sent video, hours and hours of video. At first, the officers did not understand what they were seeing. Then they began to recognize the images for what they were. War. Human war. Footage from something called the First World War showed endless fields of mud and wire, where millions of young men had charged into machine gun fire day after day, year after year. They saw something called the Holocaust, where humans had built factories specifically designed to murder other humans by the millions. They saw atomic bombs fall on cities, turning everything to ash and shadow in a single flash of light. The videos kept coming. Vietnam, Rwanda, Syria, Ukraine, 200 years of human conflict condensed into a single transmission, and at the end a message from something called the United Nations Security Council. The message was 3 words long. Come and take. Or watch the videos again that night, alone in his command chamber. He had conquered species that were physically stronger than his own. He had defeated civilizations with technology far beyond what Earth possessed, but he had never encountered anything like this. There were predators, yes. They took what they wanted and destroyed what stood in their way, but they did so with purpose, with calculation, with the cold efficiency of a species that had mastered the art of conquest. Humans were different. Humans killed each other with passion. They killed over ideas, over invisible lines drawn on maps, over gods that might not even exist. They built weapons of unimaginable destruction and then actually used them against their own kind. They had invented a word for the complete destruction of an entire people and then had done it anyway, more than once. The most disturbing part was not the violence itself, the understood violence. The disturbing part was that humans had done all of this to each other and still survived, still built civilizations, still laughed and loved and created art and explored the stars. They had looked into the darkness at the heart of their own nature and had not flinched. They had kept going. One of Orr's junior officers requested permission to speak. The young's voice was uncertain. He asked what they should do if the humans did not surrender. He asked what they should do if the humans fought back. Or did not answer immediately. He was still watching the videos, still watching humans charge across no man's land into certain death, still watching mushroom clouds rise over ruined cities, still watching and trying to understand how any species could survive being this fundamentally broken. "We will proceed as planned," he finally said, but his voice carried less certainty than before. On Earth, something remarkable was happening. For the first time in human history, every nation on the planet was working toward the same goal. Old enemies sat down at the same table. Countries that had threatened each other with nuclear annihilation just weeks before now shared intelligence and combined their militaries. The Americans worked with the Russians. The Chinese worked with the Indians. The Israelis worked with the Iranians. Every border dispute, every trade war, every ideological conflict was set aside. The unity was not perfect. There were still arguments, still distrust, still old hatreds that simmered beneath the surface. But for the first time, humanity had found an enemy that made all of their internal conflicts seem petty. For the first time, they had a common cause that every human being could agree on: survival. General Maria Santos of the newly formed Earth Defense Council spoke to the world on the third day after the arrival. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but her voice was steady as she addressed the billions of people watching her from every continent. "They think we are primitives," she said. "They think we will surrender because we cannot match their technology. They think we will break because they are stronger." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "They do not know us. They do not understand what we are. We are the species that survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. We are the species that split the atom and walked on the moon and kept going even when we had every reason to give up. They want to fight." She allowed herself a small, cold smile. "We will give them one they will never forget." In orbit, Admiral Orr gave the order to begin the invasion. Dropships fell from the bellies of his warships like rain. Each one carried 100 soldiers, armored and armed with weapons that could punch through steel. They expected to face resistance. They expected casualties. What they did not expect was what they found when they landed. The first wave targeted major cities across North America and Europe. They landed expecting terrified civilians fleeing in panic. Instead, they found empty streets and silent buildings. The humans had evacuated. Millions of people had simply vanished into the countryside, into underground shelters, into the mountains and forests that covered so much of their planet. And then the attacks began. Snipers hidden in ruined buildings picked off officers from half a mile away. Improvised explosives ripped through patrol formations. Supply lines were cut by saboteurs who seemed to melt into the shadows. Every time they thought they had secured an area, something would explode or someone would die. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning and disappearing before they could respond. On the fourth day of the ground war, a captain named A led his unit through the ruins of what had once been called Chicago. The city was a maze of shattered concrete and twisted metal. The humans had destroyed their own buildings to create cover and deny the invaders clear sight lines. It was tactically brilliant and completely insane. Who destroyed their own cities to slow down an enemy? Humans are realized, humans did. His unit was ambushed 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. The attack came from everywhere at once. Gunfire from ruined windows, grenades from storm drains, and then the humans themselves, charging from the rubble with nothing but knives and rage. I watched in horror as a human woman, barely half the size of a soldier, tackled one of his men and drove a blade into the gap between his armor plates. She was killed moments later, but she died with her teeth bared in something that might have been a smile. That night, I sent a message to Admiral Orr. The message was brief and honest. He said that the humans were not fighting like any species the Ascendancy had ever faced. They were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to make the pay for every inch of ground in blood. They were fighting like animals that had been backed into a corner. They were fighting like they had nothing left to lose. Admiral Orr read the message in his command chamber. He thought about the videos the humans had sent. He thought about all the wars they had fought against each other. And for the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if the Ascendancy had made a terrible mistake. The ground war on Earth entered its third month, and the Ascendancy was losing soldiers faster than they could replace them. This was not supposed to happen. The Ascendancy had conquered 11 species. They had broken civilizations that spanned dozens of star systems. But these humans, these primitive savages who could barely reach their own moon, were bleeding them dry. Admiral Orr stood before the holographic display in his command ship, studying the casualty reports. The numbers were staggering. In 3 months, he had lost more soldiers than in all of his previous campaigns combined. The humans showed no signs of surrendering. If anything, they were fighting harder than ever. The problem was not human technology. Their weapons were primitive by standards. Their vehicles were slow and loud. Their aircraft were barely worth shooting down. On paper, this should have been the easiest conquest in the history of the Ascendancy. But war was not fought on paper. General coordinated the human resistance from a bunker buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps. She was a tall woman with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair, and she had spent 40 years studying the art of war. She had commanded troops in 3 different conflicts before they arrived. Now she commanded all of humanity. Her strategy was simple. They needed Earth's resources intact. They needed the planet's water and minerals and farmland. That was why they had come. That was why they did not simply burn the surface clean and start over, intended to use this against them. On her orders, human forces began a campaign of systematic destruction. When they advanced toward a water treatment plant, humans blew it up. When they tried to occupy a mining complex, humans collapsed the tunnels. When they established a forward base in fertile farmland, humans salted the earth and burned the crops. Every resource they needed was to them. Every piece of infrastructure they required was destroyed before they could use it. The High Command sent furious messages demanding that or put a stop to this madness. They had invested enormous resources in this invasion. They expected returns. Instead, they were watching their investment burn. Or tried everything. He tried targeting the human leadership, but moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few days. He tried mass bombardment, but the humans had spread out so widely that no single strike could break them. He tried offering terms, promising better treatment for humans who surrendered. The few who accepted were immediately killed by their own people. The doctrine of escalation called it during one of her encrypted broadcasts to resistance cells around the world. We cannot match their technology. We cannot defeat them in open battle. But we can make this war so expensive, so painful, so utterly devastating that they will have no choice but to withdraw. Every meter of ground they take will cost them more than it is worth. Every victory will feel like defeat. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. And if they will not leave, then we will make them wish they had never come. The resistance grew more brutal with each passing week. Human fighters stopped taking prisoners. Captured soldiers were executed, their bodies left in public places as warnings. Supply convoys were ambushed with increasing frequency, their contents either seized or destroyed. And civilians, ordinary men and women who had never held a weapon before in their lives, joined the fight in numbers that they could not have imagined. In what had once been Russia, an old woman named organized a network of partisans that operated across thousands of miles. Her fighters sabotaged equipment, poisoned their water supplies, and spread disinformation that kept the invaders constantly off balance. She was 73 years old and had lost her entire family in the first wave of attacks. She had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. In China, a young man named Wei led a group of engineers who specialized in reverse engineering captured technology. They could not reproduce the advanced weapons yet, but they learned to disable shields and jam their communications. This information spread across the globe through encrypted channels, giving human fighters new advantages almost daily. In Africa, former soldiers from a dozen different nations formed a united army that struck at forces with devastating precision. They knew the terrain. They knew how to disappear into the bush and emerge where the enemy least expected them. They called themselves the Lions, and they made the invaders pay for every step they took on African soil. They controlled the skis. They had orbital superiority. They could, if they chose, glass entire continents with their weapons, but that would defeat the purpose of the invasion. They needed Earth's resources. They needed the planet to be worth conquering, and the humans knew this. So the humans kept destroying. They burned their own cities rather than let them use them as bases. They collapsed bridges and tunnels and highways. They poisoned wells and demolished dams. It was scorched earth on a scale that the galaxy had never seen, carried out by a species that would rather destroy everything it had built than see it fall into enemy hands. Captain A, who had survived the ambush in Chicago, sent another report to Admiral, or after witnessing humans destroy their own hospital, rather than let forces capture the medical supplies inside. The humans had evacuated the patients first, carrying them on stretchers through underground tunnels to safety. Then they had blown the building sky high, killing a dozen soldiers who had been approaching from the east. These creatures are insane, A wrote. They do not think like any species we have ever encountered. They do not fight for survival. They fight for something else. Something I do not have a word for. They would rather die standing than live kneeling. And they would rather destroy everything they have than let us take it from them. The word I was looking for was pride. Or perhaps it was spite. Or perhaps it was something even older and darker, something that had been bred into humans over millions of years of evolution on a harsh and unforgiving world. Whatever it was, they had never faced anything like it. In the 6th month of the war, a patrol in South America made a discovery that changed everything. They found a hidden facility deep in the Amazon rainforest, camouflaged so well that it had escaped orbital detection. Inside, human scientists and engineers were working on something that made the commander's blood run cold. It was a hyperspace drive. Crude, cobbled together from salvage technology, probably unstable as hell. But it was a hyperspace drive. The humans had captured enough equipment to reverse engineer faster than light travel, and if they could do that, what else could they do? The facility was destroyed in the attack along with everyone inside, but the message was clear. The humans were not just fighting to survive. They were learning, adapting, growing. Given enough time, they might become a threat not just to this invasion force but to the ascendancy itself. Admiral or requested reinforcements. He explained the situation in detail. He described the human resistance, the scorched earth tactics, the captured technology. He warned that this was not an ordinary conquest and that the humans were dangerous in ways that the ascendancy had never encountered before. High Command's response was dismissive. They told him to stop making excuses. They told him that the ascendancy had conquered 11 species and that a bunch of primitives on a backwater world should not be a challenge. They told him to finish the job or face the consequences. Or read the message and felt something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. Not fear of High Command, though their punishments could be severe. Fear of what would happen if he did finish the job. Fear of what humanity would become if they survived this war. In her bunker beneath the Alps, received word that the Amazon facility had been discovered and destroyed. She mourned the scientists who had died, brave men and women who had known the risks and accepted them anyway. But she did not despair. The Amazon facility had been a decoy. The real project was hidden somewhere else, somewhere that would never think to look, and it was almost ready. Looked at the reports from resistance cells around the world. The losses were staggering. Millions of humans had died in the fighting. Cities that had stood for centuries were now rubble. The economy had collapsed. Infrastructure had been destroyed. By any rational measure, humanity was losing. But they were losing faster. Their casualties were mounting. Their morale was crumbling. Their supply lines were stretched thin. And soon, very soon, humanity would have a weapon that would change everything. Hold on whispered to no one in particular. Just hold on a little longer. We are almost there. In orbit, Admiral or stared down at the blue and green planet below. He had been a soldier for 600 years. He had seen things that would drive lesser beings mad, but he had never felt this kind of dread. The humans were doing something. He could feel it. They were planning something big. He ordered increased patrols. He demanded better intelligence. He told his commanders to watch for anything unusual, anything that might indicate a coordinated human offensive. But deep down, he knew it would not be enough. The humans had proven themselves masters of deception. When they struck, it would come from a direction no one expected. And when it did, the ascendancy would learn what humans were truly capable of. 18 months into the occupation, humanity launched Operation Prometheus. The plan had been in development since the first week of the invasion. While partisans fought and died across the globe, while cities burned and millions perished, a small team of humanity's best engineers had been working in a facility hidden beneath the ice of Antarctica. Their mission was simple and almost certainly suicidal. Build a hyperspace drive. Install it in a ship. Strike at the heart of the enemy. The captured technology had been difficult to understand. Alien computers used logic systems that made no sense to human minds. Alien materials required new tools to work with. Alien physics operated on principles that contradicted everything humans thought they knew about the universe. But human engineers were stubborn creatures, and they had something they had never expected: desperation. 3 cargo ships were retrofitted for the mission. They were ugly vessels, originally designed to haul supplies between Earth and a small mining operation on Mars. Now they carried the largest nuclear payloads humanity had ever assembled. Each ship held enough firepower to crack a small moon. The crews were volunteers, every one of them. They knew they would not be coming back. Captain James commanded the lead ship. He was son, though he had not spoken to his mother in 5 years before the invasion. Their reunion had been brief and painful. She had asked him not to go. He had told her this was the only way. She had cried, the only time anyone had ever seen her cry, and then she had saluted him and let him leave. The jump coordinates had been calculated by a team of astrophysicists working with incomplete data and prayers. They believed the hyperspace drives would work. They hoped the ships would emerge somewhere near the home system. They knew there was a significant chance that something would go wrong, and all 3 ships would simply disappear into the void between stars. "We are not heroes," James told his crew in the moments before the jump. "We are weapons. Humanity has forged us into weapons, and we will be used as weapons are used. Our job is not to survive. Our job is to hit the enemy so hard that they never forget what we did. Our job is to make them afraid." The 3 ships activated their hyperspace drives simultaneously. Reality twisted around them. Colors that had no names washed over the hulls. The universe screamed. And then, impossibly, they emerged on the other side. The home system was everything the intelligence reports had suggested. A massive red star at the center, orbited by dozens of planets and moons, all connected by a web of orbital stations and shipyards. This was where the Ascendancy built their fleets. This was the industrial heart of an empire that had conquered half a galaxy, and 3 tiny human ships had just appeared in the middle of it. They detected the intruders almost immediately. Warships scrambled from orbital stations. Weapons platforms powered up. A defensive grid that had never been breached prepared to destroy the invaders. They expected a fight. What they got was something else entirely. The first human ship was destroyed within minutes. A cruiser caught it with a sustained beam that cut through the primitive shields like they were not even there. The ship exploded in a flash of light, its nuclear payload detonating harmlessly in space. 112 human lives ended in an instant. The second ship lasted longer. Its pilot, a woman named Sarah, managed to weave through the initial barrage through a combination of skill and luck that bordered on the miraculous. She got within range of a major shipyard before a spread of missiles finally caught her. Her last transmission was 3 words, the same 3 words humanity had sent in response to the ultimatum. Come and take. The third ship reached its target. James flew his vessel directly into the largest orbital construction platform in the system. They fired everything they had at him. Beams scored his hull. Missiles detonated all around him. His ship was falling apart, systems failing one by one, crew members dying at their stations. But the ship kept going. And when it finally struck the platform, the nuclear payload detonated. The explosion was visible from the surface of the nearest planet. The construction platform, a structure the size of a small city, simply ceased to exist. 37 warships that had been docked for repairs were destroyed. The shockwave damaged dozens more vessels and knocked out power across half the system. In a single moment, the Ascendancy lost more ships than they had lost in the past century of conquests. And then the messages began to arrive. Transmissions from the human ships, set to broadcast automatically upon the detection of frequencies. The messages were simple. They explained what had happened. They showed images of the construction platform's destruction. They promised that this was only the beginning. If they did not withdraw from Earth, more ships would come. More targets would burn. The humans would keep coming until there was nothing left to destroy. The High Command received the messages with something approaching panic. This was not possible. Primitive species did not strike at the conquered peoples did not fight back like this. The rules of war, rules that the Ascendancy had defined over 2,000 years of conquest, were being rewritten by a species that should have been beneath their notice. Admiral or received word of the attack while standing on the bridge of his command ship, watching yet another failed attempt to pacify the human resistance. He listened to the report in silence. When it was finished, he did something his officers had never seen him do. He laughed. Of course, he said quietly, of course they did, because that is what they are. That is what they have always been, survivors, fighters, monsters who refuse to stay dead. He ordered his communications officer to open a channel to Earth, to the human resistance, to specifically. When the channel was open, he spoke words that no admiral had ever spoken to a conquered species. I request a ceasefire. The negotiations that followed were tense and complicated. They wanted to save face. The humans wanted blood. But in the end, both sides knew that continued war would only lead to mutual destruction. The humans had proven they could reach the still had the power to glass Earth. Neither option was acceptable. The treaty was signed 6 months later. They agreed to complete withdrawal from Earth. They agreed to pay reparations for the damage they had caused. They agreed to provide technology that would help humanity rebuild. And they agreed to something that shocked the entire galaxy. They agreed to recognize humanity as a sovereign power with full diplomatic rights. Word of the treaty spread across the stars like wildfire. The 11 species that the Ascendancy had conquered heard about the humans who had fought back and won. They heard about the primitive world that had the greatest military power in the galaxy and survived. They began to whisper among themselves. They began to wonder if they too could fight back. They began to hope. On Earth, the rebuilding began. Cities rose from the rubble. Factories came back online. Farms were replanted on soil that had been salted and burned. It would take generations to fully recover from what the war had cost. But humanity had done the impossible. They had looked extinction in the face and refused to blink. Lived to see the first anniversary of the victory. She attended a memorial service for those who had died, including her son. She did not cry. She had used up all her tears the night he left. But she stood straight and proud as the names were read, all 2 billion of them, and she knew that every death had meant something. A diplomat approached her after the ceremony. He was young by their standards, barely 3 centuries old, and he had a question that had been bothering him since the war ended. He asked her how humanity had done it. How had a primitive species with inferior technology defeated the greatest military power in the galaxy? considered the question for a long moment. She thought about all the battles she had fought, all the sacrifices that had been made, all the darkness that humanity had embraced in order to survive. And then she smiled, a thin and tired smile that held no joy. "You made one mistake," she said. "You assumed that because we fight each other, we do not know how to fight together. You saw our wars and thought we were weak. You did not understand what those wars really meant." The diplomat waited for her to continue. "We have been fighting since we climbed down from the trees," said. "We have fought over food and water and land. We have fought over gods and ideas and pride. We have killed each other in numbers that would make your species weep. And do you know what we learned from all that killing?" The diplomat shook his head. "We learned how to win." Turned to look at the memorial, at the endless list of names carved in stone. "We have been practicing for 10,000 years. All those wars, all that blood, all that suffering. It was all just practice. And when you came, when you gave us an enemy we could unite against, we finally got to show you what we had learned." She walked away, leaving the diplomat standing alone. He watched her go, this small human woman who had commanded the defense of an entire world, and he understood something that he would carry with him for the rest of his long life. They had made a mistake. They had assumed that humanity's history of internal conflict was a weakness. They had not understood that it was the opposite. Every war humanity had fought had made them better at fighting. Every horror they had inflicted on each other had prepared them for this moment. They had tempered themselves in fire and blood until they became something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that knew how to lose and keep fighting. A species that could endure any horror and survive. A species that would burn down their own world before surrendering it to an enemy. Humanity had fought like savages, and they had won. In the years that followed, other species began to seek out Earth. Some came as diplomats, hopping to learn from the humans who had the ascendancy. Others came as refugees, seeking sanctuary from their own oppressors. Still others came as scholars, wanting to study this strange and violent species that had accomplished the impossible. Humanity welcomed them all. They built new alliances. They shared what they had learned. They helped other species find the strength to fight for their own freedom, and slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to change. The ascendancy did not fall immediately. Empires rarely do, but the cracks were there, spreading with each passing year. Other species began to resist. Rebellion spread from world to world, and everywhere the rebels fought, they remembered the story of Earth. They remembered the species that had looked at the most powerful force in the galaxy and said three simple words: "Come and take." It was not the end of history. There would be more wars, more suffering, more darkness ahead, but something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the way the galaxy worked. Humanity had proven that the strong could be defeated, that the powerful could fall, that even the smallest and most primitive species could rise up and claim their place among the stars. And so they did. Humanity spread across the galaxy, carrying with them all the beauty and horror of their long and bloody history. They built new civilizations on distant worlds. They made friends and enemies in equal measure. They continued to fight, because that was what they were and what they would always be. But they never forgot the war that had made them who they were. They never forgot the billions who had died so that humanity could survive. And they never forgot the lesson they had taught the galaxy. That humans fought like savages, and they won.